In today's episode of Grow, we meet with one of Australia's highest profile property commentators, Ray White Chief Economist Nerida Conisbee. Nerida is not only one of Australia's most successful economists, she's also a wife and a mother. And in today's episode, we talk about the challenges that Nerida has overcome to achieve growth. Nerida, welcome to today's podcast. It's really fantastic to have you with us. And what a journey it's been. You know, it's been an interesting journey. So tell us, first of all, did you always intend to be an economist?
Yeah, look, I always liked numbers. And so when I was at school, I was really good at maths. And I started uni, I started doing actuarial studies. I didn't like it that much. And I started doing more statistics and particularly econometrics. So at that point, I knew I loved numbers and I found economics really interesting. And as a result, it did put me on this path to where I am now.
Now, I think the interesting thing about our podcast is, in life we all have choices. And, I think the thing about growth is when we have choices, it is pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. And I'm sure that as you've gone through your life and your career, a lot of the things that you've done have been to push yourself out of your comfort zone. So talk to us a little bit about, when you're at uni, those years from university and those early years, sort of, late teens, early 20s, are often a period of uncertainty for young people. So take us back to that time for you.
Yeah, so I was in the early 90s when I graduated, and at the time I was in Melbourne, and Melbourne had a very, very high unemployment rate. So the youth unemployment rate was about 25%.
Wow,
so
that's incredible, isn't it?
Incredible, it was tough.
Yeah.
And so most of my friends didn't have jobs, so they were stayed at school, and I graduated and I had 3 job offers, so I felt very privileged to have 3 job offers.
That's amazing, because I imagine, going through university with those sort of unemployment statistics of 25%, you had that thought in the back of your mind, am I going to get a job?
Exactly. Or what sort of job will I get? Will it not be a very good job after all these years of study? And yeah, so I felt very lucky. One of the jobs was working in Canberra as a transport economist. Another one was with NAB and their graduate program. And the third one was with a economic consulting firm that specialised in forecasting for property. And ended up taking that one. And it was quite, unusual at the time. Property in the early 90s wasn't such a popular career choice.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's really interesting when we reflect back to the 90s. It was actually a really challenging time because interest rates were incredibly high then, weren't they?
They were high, and commercial property was bad. Everything was really, really tough. So I got this job and I enjoyed it. It was working up for a lot of really big commercial property owners. There was a lot around forecasting turnover for shopping centres. Learnt so much. But I didn't love it. I think looking back, I kind of assumed no one liked their job that much, and I was probably consistent with that. I could do the job, I got paid well, but I didn't love it. So probably did that for about 10 years, which is a long time.
Exactly.
It's a job that you don't love.
To stick it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because, do you think you stuck that job out for 10 years just because you didn't know what it was that was on the other side? The money was good. You sort of thought, oh, well, I won't take the risk. What was it that made you take that leap of faith to change?
It was totally that. I didn't think there was a better job for me out there. And I think that's one of the clear things I can see now is that there's always a better job out there. I think you think it's, you do tend to stay in jobs that aren't the best for you, or you're not enjoying as much because you're so fearful of what happens next. And the thing that happened, I went to work for a company and they had a really great marketing head of marketing, and she said to me, start writing a few articles and we'll get them on we'll get them in media. And like, oh, that sounds fun, a little bit different. And I wrote an article, I can't even remember what I wrote. It was on some demographic trend in regional Victoria, and I got on the radio and I got in the newspaper, and And I was like, oh, this is so much fun. But I was like, but it's really a job. And I didn't really think of it as a job. And it wasn't until, quite a bit later that I realised, no, this is something that people want to hear the messaging and people want to understand things. And there's certainly a lot that I can do in this space.
I think that's a really interesting point because it sounds to me that, your media career was quite an accidental progression. And here you were in a situation where you were stagnant and suddenly you discovered a new skill and you went, wow, I found something that excites me. Is that when you started to notice that your career took a different direction?
I really started to enjoy it. I think that was, I went to work for a commercial agency. I was heading up their research departments, working at JLL and then Collier's. And, I wasn't, they weren't full-on media roles. I mean, I was managing big research teams and big research distribution and the like. So, weren't full-on media, but it was certainly something that I was like, well, this is such a fun part of my job and amazing if it could be my job more. And eventually it did happen that I ended up moving from commercial to residential, went to work for REA Group. And at that point, it did become a much greater part of my role.
So it's interesting, Nerida, you make economics, for me anyway, you make economics really simple. You make property economics incredibly enjoyable and really informative, which is a gift to do that. When you have a look at your career, it hasn't really been, a straight line. You've had some challenges. I often hear of other people when they talk about their careers saying that there's never a straight line to success. What are some of the challenges and hurdles that you have overcome in your success?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. When you have a look at a career, it's never plain sailing. Like, I've never met anyone where it's just been, oh, I just got this job and then I got another amazing job and then, I kept going and climbing up the ladder. There's always setbacks and you hit brick walls and you hit people that you don't get along with. And, so there's always something that does impede your journey. And it has obviously happened to me. I mean, I think for most women, going through and having children is a big one. It's a really hard decision to have kids. Looking back, it shouldn't have been such a hard decision, but at the time it was a very hard decision for me. And then once I had my children, also working when they were very little was hard too, because at that point that was when I joined Collier's, and that was when my career really started to take off. But at the same time, my kids were under 3, so it was, on one hand, my career was going amazing, but then I really missed them and really missed being with them day to day. And that was an incredibly hard time period for me.
Yes, look, I think, that, what you're saying, about it is a very double-edged sword, isn't it? Because to be a mother is just such a gift and such an incredible blessing. And, once you experience that, it is indescribable, the joy that it gives you of being a parent. And what you're saying is that mother's guilt is real, isn't it?
It is real. Yeah, and it's so unnecessary to beat yourself up about it. But it's real. And look, it wasn't even guilt. It partly was, but I knew they were being well looked after. So it was never that I felt they were missing out in their lives. I knew they weren't missing out in their lives. I think it was just that I just missed them and I liked being around them and hanging out with them. And it's interesting too with kids because, they're so cute as babies, but they're cute as teenagers too, so it's not like, that you're forever missing out on them. It's just part of the journey. But, I think that was fundamentally what it was. I just missed hanging out with them. But at the same time, I loved my job and I was going really well. So it was it was a hard time period in my life for sure.
There are a lot of parents who obviously will be, listening to our podcast. And I think one of the interesting things about, having a career and being a working mum is that it then draws in a whole new skill set again. Yeah. And not only that, being a wife as well. So you're juggling 3 really important roles, being a wife, being a mum, and being a career woman. So you sort of reach that point. How did you, being a working mum with young children, manage to juggle all of those roles and still maintain your own sanity?
Yeah, look, it was hard. I think one of the things helped that my husband and I were on the same journey. You know, he took a step back from his role. He spent a lot more time looking after the kids when they were very little day to day than I did. So that certainly helped. And at the same time, you know, some days I'd get home and be like, oh, I wish I was you. But then at the same time, you know, some of his days were very grindy and the kids were, you know, not always happy that he was looking after. You know, they just wanted, you know, what kids are like when they're little. They can be quite tricky. So I missed it, but he was very good in picking that up. And I think it was just that shared journey that we went through. And so I think it's
teamwork.
It was teamwork. You know, I look back at it when it was teamwork, and it was hard. You know, I think that's the thing. Anyone with young kids knows it's hard. You know, you can't leave little kids alone, and you know, it's such a revelation when your kids are old enough and you can leave them for an hour at home and go out and do something. But you know, that's a long time period from birth to that time, to that stage. So it's hard work, but you know, it's definitely been worthwhile. I love having my kids.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Now, you know, we talk about there is a lot of obviously media publicity now about certain changes that are coming in about you know, equal opportunity and equal pay, and you know, even talk now that pay structures are going to be made public, which is very interesting when you have a look at all of that coming up in the media. When you have a look at your career, considering that you've come through an industry where there's probably, would you say, a minority field of women in what you do? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
How have you managed to, you know, remain dignified, have integrity, be gracious as you are, and respected to get to where you are? Because no doubt, you know, you've really had to prove yourself to get to where you are.
Yeah, look, I mean, it helps that I've had some really great people as managers. So a woman called Jane Murray at JLL, a guy called Will Doherty at Colliers were super incredible. Also some really amazing people at REA, particularly people in the comms team early on that really helped me. So, you know, I think that's the thing, is like when you've got great people around you, you can do great things. And I always, you know, I mean, when you find someone great to work for, or someone great that you work with, you know, it's so good. You know, it makes your job so much fun to have those people. But conversely, when those people around you aren't that great, that's when a job becomes much less fun. So I guess I always, you know, if I was in a job and, you know, I could see changes around me and the people I was working with weren't that great, at that point I then started to think, oh, you know, I'm a little bit more open now to another role, or, you know, how can I negotiate my way out of this? And I think that's what I have done through my career, is that I haven't, you know, I've stayed at jobs for a long time, but I haven't stayed to be pig-headed. I've stayed because I've enjoyed it, and I've left because I no longer enjoy it. And so I think that's one thing, is that I've been consistent in doing that. I've also been doggedly determined, and so I've always pushed through those bad situations and realise them for bad situations and not let them deter me. So I think that's
great. Well. So you've remained resilient, and you really
I don't always feel it at the time, but you know, I look back at the times they were really, really tough, and I have remained resilient, and I've pushed my way through. And I think that's the thing, when you do go through tough career times or tough personal issues, is that not everything can be resolved, but a lot of things with your career can be resolved. You know, you can get a new boss, you can change jobs, you can, you know, move interstate. You know, there's always something you can do.
There's always a solution.
There's always a solution.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Now, the other thing, Nerida, that I think is really interesting is that, you know, you are obviously very passionate about property. That's been your main sort of area where you have become a national voice for the property market, and your predictions based on fact have been incredibly accurate. And we're grateful to have you, you know, particularly here we are in 2023, and you know, you have certain things that are happening in the economy now you've actually predicted. I do want to take you back to the 90s because, you know, here we are
fashions
now.
Are coming back.
The fashions are, the big shoulder pads. You know, one of the interesting things that we are seeing at the moment is that we've come out of a tremendous period of growth in the property market, which no one, predicted, which has happened with COVID. And interest rates have been at an all-time low. You and I, in our lifetime, have never seen interest rates of 1.9% fixed, which has been extraordinary. So, there's a lot of people now that go in, have sort of gone into a little bit of uncertainty over the past 12 months as the interest rates have gone up. But I think what's really interesting is when you and I have a chat and we talk about, when we were first home buyers, we had our own set of challenges to get into the market. So for anyone who's looking at getting into the market now, because that's the biggest thing, I know you're passionate about young people taking control of their money.
Yeah.
What would your advice be based on, going back to the 90s when it was incredibly scary for you at the time with with unemployment plus massive interest rates? Tell us a little bit about the challenges then.
Yeah, so look, every generation has its challenges. I look back at like when my mum was looking to buy and her and my dad, and at that time, when you got married, you had to quit your job. So that was one side of it.
You're saying women had to quit their job
when they got married.
Extraordinary now,
isn't it? But I mean, that's a generation ago. For some people too, whatever. But similarly, if you went to a bank as a woman, you couldn't borrow money on your own. You had to have a husband. So there's like that. I can't even imagine that as a challenge would have been incredible. Homes are obviously a lot cheaper, so that wasn't a challenge, so that was easier, but then it was very hard to get debt. Take it through to the 90s and we were worried about our jobs. We bought a house and we didn't spend. It was, our first home was pretty basic, but, we were still really, really worried that we would lose our jobs. Whereas now is around debt levels. It's absolutely around the high level of debt you need to take on to buy. And I think in any case, it's always around the earlier you buy, the better.
Yes.
Or the younger you buy, the better. It probably, in most cases, it actually doesn't matter what you buy. You could buy in probably any suburb or any city and you'll probably be fine long term. And then also having a clear direction around a long-term goal. And it doesn't, I think people think buying property is like, oh, you need to get a portfolio or, you need to buy one property and then another property. The reality is that even owning your own home at retirement, it puts you in such a vastly different situation as someone who's renting, that you are ahead of in terms of being able to have a decent retirement. It puts you so vastly ahead that it's quite alarming, because we know renters are more likely to go into poverty. You're more likely to not have stable housing. You're very susceptible to market changes. You probably, as an elderly person having to move around a lot is very difficult. So, I think there's always challenges in the first instance, but trying to work out a way to overcome those challenges is really important. And at that point, once you're on that property journey, you'll go through periods of higher interest rates, or periods when you don't have a job, or you go and have children. Everyone will go through those, like to get divorced. We know people will go through those changes, but just trying to ensure that you have your own home and that you're paying off you're in a very good situation at that point.
It's very interesting you talk about this, because one very scary statistic is that the largest homeless population in Australia is women over 55. And I know you're very passionate about young women taking financial responsibility from a young age and, not relying on, yes, we all want to aspire to, hopefully be in wonderful relationships forever. There's no guarantees of these things. So you're quite passionate about young women taking control of their finances and taking responsibility for their finances from a young age. And I guess when you look at that statistic, that's something that illustrates why that should be the case. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. Look, I think, like you say, there's no guarantees in life, and you can be in a fantastic relationship, but, that relationship can break down, or people can lose their jobs. Life is long, and lots of things can happen. So, I think at young women, if they can afford to buy a home on their own, amazing. If you can get into the market early, and you go into life owning your own property, amazing. And obviously that's not for everyone, but even things like superannuation and the effect, everyone, financial advisors always talk about the effects of compounding, but money you save in your 20s is worth so much once you hit retirement, compared to if you start saving in your 40s, that money's not going to be worth as much in retirement. So and so I think it's, in your 20s, it's such a good time, even a little bit of money, putting it aside, even buying a property that's probably not your dream home, because who buys their dream home first? Probably no one. But even buying a small apartment, or buying in an area that you may not love, but you can get a rental return. It's such a good idea to do that, and it is something that with my kids, I say to them, if you come out of school or go to university, there's two things I want you to do. One is to have a job you can support yourself. Two, buy a home. And if you do both those things, I'll be happy. I don't expect anything more from you than that, because that will set you up for life financially, compared to someone that doesn't make those decisions.
That's tremendous advice, and I think for anyone, wherever they are in life, that's just really such great advice, and the key to how you can grow a wonderful future.
Exactly.
Nerida, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.